On the record in the matters of the people of the state of Michigan versus Michonne Maddock, Kathleen Burden, Amy Fascinello, John Haggard, Marianne Henry, and Michelle Lundgren. Council appearances.
Good morning, LaDonna Logan on behalf of the people.
Good morning, Kayla Crino, appearing on behalf of the people.
Good morning, Your Honor. Nicholas Sonberg on behalf of Michonne Maddock.
Good morning, Your Honor. George Danini, appearing on behalf of Kathy Burden. Good morning, Your Honor. Paul Stablin, appearing on behalf and with Ms. Fascinello, who's seated behind me.
Good morning, Your Honor. Derek Koger on behalf of Kathy Burden.
Good morning, Your Honor. Mary Chartier on behalf of John Haggard, who is seated to my right.
Good morning, Your Honor. Kurt E. Kraus on behalf of Mr. Haggard, who's also seated to my right.
Good morning, Your Honor. Dwayne Silverthorne from the Office of Public Defender on behalf of Michelle Lundgren, who is seated to my left.
And good morning, Your Honor. George Brown on behalf of Marianne Henry, who sits to my right.
Okay, wonderful. You can be seated. Today was day 2 of continuation of the preliminary examination for these 6 co-defendants, and we have all our co-defendants present and near their attorneys, I believe, correct? Or in some proximity, I guess, I hope. Any preliminary matters before we call our next witness?
None for the people, Your Honor.
Any from defense?
Oh, none, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay, and the sequestration order is still in place, so we don't have any witnesses in the courtroom.
Just the people's next witness.
Okay, very good. You can call your witness.
This time the people will call Ms. Laura Cox.
You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're going to give is the truth and the whole truth under penalty of perjury.
I do.
Think you can have a seat there. Okay, there's a microphone that's right in front of you. My court reporter is behind you. She has to take down everything that's being stated here today. We have one fan going at the time. That one's going to be going in a minute. Also going to open that door for air circulation, please. And then, so the sound could get drowned out. So even I was asked to speak up louder. Also, there's these. So if you can keep your voice loud and clear, make sure you have yes or no's and no head nods or head shakes, okay?
Yes,
And then if there's an objection, we have 6 attorneys on this case. Might take some time. You would stop your response. I will make a ruling on the objection and then I'll tell you if you can give that answer or not, okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. State your first and last name and spell both.
Laura Cox, Lauracox.
Proceed, counsel.
Good morning.
Good morning.
In 2020, where did you work, ma'am?
I work for the Michigan Republican Party.
And how long, and in what position?
I was the chairman of the Michigan Republican Party.
Okay, and how long were you in that position as chairman of the Republican Party?
About a year and a half, almost 2 years.
And before you were chairman of the Republican Party, did you hold any other positions within the Republican Party?
No.
As chairman of the Michigan Republican Party, could you tell us what your duties were?
I ran an office of staff. I did political events. I went around and did press events as well. Worked with volunteers to get people to work for candidates, Republican candidates up and down the ballot across the state of Michigan.
Now, when you say up and down the ballot, could you explain that?
Yes, it would be for anybody that's running as a Republican candidate at a local level during that election cycle, like a state representative, or we worked with congressmen, congressional candidates, Senate candidates, as well as the presidential.
And I believe you earlier testified that you had an office. Where was that office located?
That office was in Lansing, Michigan.
Do you recall the street address?
I think it's 520 Seymour, 540 Seymour. I apologize.
But it's in the city of Lansing?
It is.
Okay. And when you were in office, would it have been at the Seymour location?
Yeah.
Now, in 2020, obviously during COVID, but that was also a year of a presidential election. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Did the Republican Party host a state convention?
Not in person, but we did hold a convention virtually.
And during that virtual convention, were candidates nominated for the party's electors?
Yes, the congressional.
Okay. And how were you able to manage that virtually?
We had a computer program, and so delegates across the state were allowed to vote in their congressional district for their candidates, specifically for the election.
Okay, and at the time of 2020, the state had 14 congressional districts.
Yes,
Okay, what about the at-large nominees? How were they selected?
those were selected at a state committee meeting, which was held via conference call.
So if my math is correct, and I'm not good at math, there were a total of 16 nominees for Republican elected.
Yes,
Now, after the Michigan Republican Convention is held, is there any immediate obligations for the nominees?
the electors,
Yeah, nominees for electors, I'm sorry.
not that I'm aware of, no.
After the November 2020 election, were there any obligations that were triggered for the Republican nominees for elected? If you recall.
Can you repeat the question?
No, I cannot. I'm gonna withdraw it.
Okay.
November 2020, the presidential election occurred, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and do you recall the popular vote for the state of Michigan was certified for which candidate?
The Democrats, Joe Biden.
And with the popular vote for the state of Michigan being certified for the Democrats, does that mean that the Democratic nominees for elector would be considered the electors for the state of Michigan?
Yes.
Now, after the November election, do you recall if there was any conversation about a meeting for the Republican nominees for elector?
Yes,
Do you recall when those conversations started?
I don't recall specifically the dates, but I would say early December. maybe.
I'm going to ask you to try and keep your voice up because there are a lot of defense attorneys who have to hear you.
I'm sorry, around early December. I don't remember the exact date.
Okay. Were these conversations in person?
No,
How were the conversations conducted?
probably via email or phone call.
Do you recall who participated in the conversations?
Well, there was a phone call, a conference call that I had on December 12th and 13th. That conference call had John Black from the RNC, Sean Flynn from the Trump campaign. And I can't remember who else was on that call.
And you said this was a phone call,
A
correct?
phone call. And there were emails and phone calls before that, as well as my counsel was working with a lawyer for the Trump campaign, trying to negotiate.
You negotiate a what?
A plan.
And was this a plan for the Republican elector nominees to meet?
Yes.
Okay, and what was that plan?
My plan was to have the electors meet in a ceremony to honor them. To be an elector is a very prestigious award. It's like a lifetime achievement award for an activist in the party. We didn't have the ability we didn't have an in-person convention, so we didn't get to honor them. I know that there was some conversations to have them meet, so this was kind of my idea to have them meet in a ceremonial way.
Okay, so let's stay along the lines with your plan. Did you have a date as far as your plan when you wanted the electors to meet so they could be honored?
Well, the date, there was a plan that was not my plan, and then I took that date and applied my plan to it, if I'm being clear.
And what date was that?
December 14th, 2020,
And where were the electors to meet on December 14th, 2020?
at the Michigan Republican Party headquarters
And that's the 520 Seymour in the city of Lansing?
in the city of Lansing.
And how were the electors to be notified to come to the Michigan Republican headquarters for, I guess, to be honored?
I think some of them were called by some of my staff members.
Now, you said that there was another plan outside of your plan.
Yes,
Who created that plan, if you know?
I don't know who created it. I don't know the emphasis of it.
What was that plan?
I heard from a attorney, Bob Norton, that the,
Objection, Judge, is to the hearsay that Mr. Norton may have sent to.
Do you want to address the objection?
I was waiting to see if anyone else was gonna join first.
Kathleen Burton Jones. Ms. Automatic, Mary Henry joins.
Mr. Haggard joins.
And as to
London
hearsay,
joins.
oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. As to hearsay, this is not going to be used for the truth of the matter asserted, just to the effect on the listener and why Ms. Cox devised her own plan.
Okay, your objection's overruled.
Please continue, ma'am.
You can answer.
Robert Norton called me and said that there was a plan to have the electors spend the night in the Capitol on December 13th. We passed the vote per the state of per the law, of the state of Michigan on December 13th.
This may seem like a silly question, but why did you not like that plan?
In my gut, I didn't think it was a very good idea. The main reason was that the Capitol was shut down. And so I didn't know if there would be concern for them being in the Capitol when it was shut down. And second, some of the electors are older. I didn't think it would be a safe environment for them. You know, wouldn't be a good plan. I don't think there's beds in the Capitol, that kind of thing. And I just didn't think the plan was a good idea.
And how soon after Mr. Norton told you this, well, did you do anything else when you got that information besides devise your own plan?
I called at the time of the leader in the Senate, Mike Shirkey, and asked him to figure out what senator was supposed to post this group of individuals and asked him to make sure that he put a stop to it. He agreed with me and he said he was on it and would take care of it.
And see, well, I don't know if I can answer that, so I'll move on. As part of your plan, was there going to be any sort of document in place that would be signed by any nominee of the electors?
I had a document that one person would sign. One elected would sign.
And could you tell us what was the purpose of the document?
The document clearly states that if the election were overturned, these electors would serve their job to cast their votes for Donald Trump and Michael Pence.
And why did you feel that a document like that needed to be presented and signed?
I felt it was a good option versus them signing other documents that were shared with me.
Can you tell us about any of the other documents shared with us, like describe what they were?
I mean, I have to look at it.
Okay. Understanding this was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, the document that you supported, did you actually create that document?
My counsel did.
But did you review it and approve it?
Yeah, we worked with Thor Hearn, who was working for the Trump campaign, and we negotiated that contract. I wouldn't say contract, document, I'm sorry, it's not a contract, document. And we shared it with the campaign as well as with RNC.
Permission to approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Cox, I'm going to hand you what has been marked as People's Proposed Exhibit 8. It is a 2-page document. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I did.
And what is that now?
This is the document that I created along with my counsel.
And that has the language that the Republican electors would be willing to serve.
Yes, it does.
People would move to admit People's Proposed Exhibit 8.
Objection as to relevance. There's no indication that Mr. Haggard was ever shown that document, ever provided that document. Don't understand how it's relevant to these charges that Ms. Cox's counsel created another document. Again, that there's no indication that my client has seen.
Kathleen Burton has no objection to this.
We also object to that. But as to Michelle Long, there's no evidence that Michelle Long was aware of stuff.
Michelle Maddock has no objection to that.
Okay, so you have 2 objections.
As to this document, Your Honor, this witness is laying a foundation that later witnesses, as an offer of proof, I can say will corroborate that this was presented on December 14th at the meeting of the electors at the headquarters. This witness cannot testify to that, but she can testify to the foundation of the creation of the document, the purpose of the document, and the language of the document, which I think is context the court needs to understand what does and does not happen on December 14th, 2020 at the Seymour location.
Okay, so there's later going to be some testimony that,
About that document
this
actually
document.
being presented.
okay. Okay, for the purposes of her laying the foundation, the objections are overruled.
Now,
People's aid submitted.
thank you. Now, were you at the Michigan Republican headquarters on December 14th, 2020?
No, I was not.
Okay, and why was that?
I had COVID.
And if you were unable to present it, how was this document supposed to be presented at the meeting?
I had staff present at the meeting, and we had given it to the staff to present to the group for the ceremony.
Now, you stated that there have been, during the meetings about having the electors come to Lansing on December 14th, that you had seen other documents that you did not quite approve of. Was that your testimony?
Yes.
Permission to approach, Your Honor.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to hand you what has been admitted as People's Exhibit 7, and I'm going to start with the second page of that document. And I'm going to ask you to look at the second, third, and fourth page and let me know when you are done. Now, granted, that document has signatures on it. Have you ever seen a copy of that document in any form?
I couldn't be certain. There was a lot of different, I've seen this as it was presented in the news, in the newspaper, reported in the news, but I can't be certain this was a document that was floated around.
Did you create that document?
No. I did
Okay.
not.
Why did you think that a document was needed at all? If the point of the meeting was just to honor the nominees for elected?
There was cases that were working through the judicial system at the time, and there were concerns that maybe something would be overturned, and so we wanted to have something that would show that if they were called to act, if the election was overturned and when Michigan did go to President Trump, that they would actually cast their votes.
And if nothing happened, if the current certified votes were not turned in the favor of President Trump, your document has no power, correct?
Correct.
It only has power if the votes were turned in favor of President Trump. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I know you don't remember all of the documents you saw before Exhibit 8 was created, but do you remember some of the aspects or components of those documents that caused you concern?
Just that they would be casting a vote. The document is stating that they were casting a vote, but they weren't the electors at that moment, in my opinion.
So unless there was some change to the determination of the Michigan vote at that time, the Republican nominees could not cast a vote. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I'm just gonna object on reading. It's very.
Could the nominees for Republican elector cast a vote if there was no change in the Michigan results?
No.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Hi, Ms. Cox. My name is Mary Chartier. It's an unusual setup that you need to turn to your right to chat with me, but just because we have so many lawyers in the room. So I want to ask you about where you ended in a degree. You talked about cases working through the system. Were you involved in any of those lawsuits?
I'm not a lawyer. I might have been in one or two. I can't remember. I apologize. Because there were a lot of different cases.
A lot of different cases going on about concerns with the election.
Yes.
And was the party involved in any of those lawsuits?
Yes.
So the Republican Party was challenging the results of the presidential election?
Yes. And I believe, yes. And there were other cases. They were in different, I think they were in federal and in state court in Michigan.
So on December 14th of 2020, is it your recollection these lawsuits are still going on, at least some of them in federal and state court?
It is my recollection, yes.
And if any of those lawsuits had been successful, potentially the result of the election, at least in Michigan, could change, correct?
Yes.
And then President Trump would at least have won the state of Michigan, correct?
Yes.
Now, were the concerns related to voter fraud or how the election was conducted? What were some of those concerns?
We were concerned about Antrim County was the one main example of concern where votes were cast for, showed to be cast for Joe Biden, but they really were votes for President Trump. That computer system was used throughout the state, so there was a lot of concern about that. Also, the vote counting in Detroit at the TCF Center was another big concern with the observation of the volunteers. They boarded up the windows. Historically, that has been an issue for years and years. And this was, again, another example of it being a concern.
The Antrim County, you said there was a voting system where someone cast a vote for President Trump, but it went to Joseph Biden?
Yeah.
And do you know, was that a one-time occurrence, or at least at the time, what was the thought? Was that prevalent?
Your Honor, I'm gonna ask that some foundation be laid that this witness has personal knowledge of this information.
Okay, that's fine.
I'll ask Ms. Cox, how are you aware of at least what the claims were in Antrim County?
I am.
And
Yes.
how were you aware of that?
As it was reported by the clerk of the county.
Your Honor, I'm gonna object that that's hearsay.
Goes to the effect on the listener. We've heard a lot of that yesterday. So Ms. Cox is at the time head of the Republican Party in the state of Michigan. She's involved in at least some of the lawsuits. The party is involved in others. Why she created the ceremonial document, what her concerns may have been about other documents, all goes to what she knows that is going on in the state at the time about the concerns about voter fraud and why they wanted to have electors in place in case the results of the election changed.
I don't even think it's being offered for the truth of the matter asserted, so
Correct.
overrule.
So Ms. Cox, the concern in Antrim County was that votes were switched from President Trump to Joe Biden, correct?
Yes.
Do you know at the time, was the concern that this was a one-time occurrence, one vote, or more prevalent than that?
It wasn't just one vote that was split.
So, and do you know, was that software system used in other counties?
Yes, it was.
Was the concern that other counties might have been similarly impacted by votes being switched from President Biden to, or excuse me, President Trump to Joseph Biden?
There was a concern, yes.
Was there a concern about the software either being intentionally or unintentionally manipulated?
Yes,
And was that the basis for at least some of the lawsuits?
yes,
Did you publicly discuss your concerns about the election?
I did.
Was that one time or multiple times?
Multiple.
Was it on the news at all?
Yes,
Do you know, were other people publicly sharing their concerns about the election?
yes,
Was this on the news a lot?
yes,
Pretty much every night, correct?
yes.
Were members of the Republican Party contacting the party to express their concerns?
Yes,
And did members express concerns about what is being done?
yes,
Were there concerns about what happens if, let's just talk about even one of these lawsuits is successful and the vote switched to President Trump at the time? In terms of what do we do about the electors?
were there conversations?
Oh, yes. Were there conversations about that?
Yes,
And what was the concern if the electors didn't meet even ceremonially? Like in a ceremony, and let's say everyone just stayed home and the electors didn't meet. What would be the concern if ultimately Michigan switched to President Trump?
the lawyers had concerns about that. Lots of lawyers had concerns about that.
Lots of lawyers had concerns. And do you know what those concerns were?
If the election were to be overturned in Michigan, they wanted a record that the electors would vote for the president and the vice president. Trump.
If that didn't happen, then was the concern that Michigan would lose those elector votes?
That was one concern that was expressed to me. That,
What were other concerns?
I mean, I think that was, I should say that was the main.
That was the main concern, that Michigan would essentially lose a say in the presidential election.
Yes,
The document that you indicated that you created, I take that back, you said a lawyer created that. Do you remember the lawyer who created that document?
yes.
Who was that?
Stuart Sandler.
Stuart Sandler. And did you share that document with the Attorney General's office?
Yes,
Do you remember when you shared that?
when I was interviewed. It was August and August.
And you shared the unexecuted document, correct?
Yes,
You don't have an executed document
no,
because you weren't there on December 14th.
I was not.
You were struggling with COVID.
Yes, ma'am,
So do you know Mr. Haggard?
I do.
Do you know what he was told on December 14th, 2020?
I do not.
Do you know what Mr. Haggard thought on December 14th, 2020?
I do not.
Do you know what he believed on December 14th, 2020?
No,
Right, or his intent, correct?
yes, correct.
You talked about a phone call that you received from Bob Norton. Who is that?
He is, works for Hillsdale County, I mean, not Hillsdale College, I believe. University.
Is he involved with the Republican Party?
He is.
And he was talking about a plan. You indicated that, for example, spending the night in the Capitol, that sort of thing. That didn't happen, correct? To your knowledge?
To my knowledge, no.
To your knowledge, that didn't happen. Was his plan, when he discussed that with you, at least based on, again, his concerns about what happens if Michigan switches to, at the time, President Trump?
Yes,
And you also indicated that you had a phone call with John Black and Sean Flynn. Who's Sean Flynn?
Sean Flynn is an attorney that was working for the Trump campaign in Lansing.
So he's an attorney as well.
Yes,
What about John Black?
don't know if he's an attorney. I don't think he's an attorney. I don't know.
Were other attorneys involved as well? So we heard about Sean Flynn. Were there other lawyers involved in these conversations?
I apologize, I don't remember who else was on the phone call at the time. There might have been other lawyers. I don't know.
Was when the party had their concerns about losing Michigan's elector votes, were there other lawyers involved besides Mr. Flynn, to your knowledge, even if you don't remember their names?
I'm sure there were, but I don't know.
So I guess my question is, this wasn't just lay people with a concern they read in the paper. Lawyers actually were expressing this concern to you?
Yes, ma'am.
We talked about the problems in Antrim County. We talked about the problems in Wayne County. Were there other counties that you had concerns about?
There was an issue in Oakland County where they had called the election incorrectly at first. And it was a local level election, I believe, and I don't recall the office where it was. It was in a community in Oakland County.
Wayne and Oakland County, you would agree with me, are two pretty big counties in the state of Michigan, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know who was present on December 14th, 2020, who would have worked for you? Was there any member of your team at the Republican headquarters?
Yes.
Who was that?
Troy Hudson, Tony Zammett, Henrietta Toe, and I believe Michael Anderson.
You talked about the document you prepared. Did you give them instructions to share that with the Republican electors?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know if they did that? Did they report to you that they did?
Thank you.
After December 14th, 2020, did you ever call the police about a concern for anything that had occurred on that date, or were you contacted by the Attorney General's office?
I was subpoenaed by the attorney.
You were
general's office.
subpoenaed by the Attorney General's office. Did they contact you first or just send you that subpoena?
They contacted first.
And then they sent you the subpoena?
They sent it to
One moment,
They
please.
sent it to whom?
Counsel.
council.
Oh,
I'll clear that up. The document, that the Attorney General's office shared with you, I'm sorry, can you clear that up for us? Who created that document?
Which document?
Oh, sorry, thank you. Was this created by Stu Sandler? Is that what you had indicated?
Yes.
And that's the document that you asked your team to share with the electors?
Yes.
No further questions. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr.
Good morning.
Are we still going in order?
You are, wanna go?
you took it first, but it doesn't matter.
I'd like to go, Your Honor.
Okay.
Thank you. Ms. Cox, did you have a Facebook account at the time? And
I
you had a Facebook account back in November and December of 2020?
Yes.
You still have that same account to this day?
Yes.
Did you also have a Twitter account?
Yes.
Do you still have that same account to this day?
Yes.
As chairwoman, did you also have any control of like the party's social media accounts?
I didn't post on parties, social media.
So you were not the person personally. Did you have somebody else do it for you?
Yes.
You agree that with your position you held at the time that you had influence over other people?
I don't understand. What
Do
you
you, do you believe, do you agree that your position that you held at the time gave you influence, that your opinion was influential to others?
I mean that maybe.
You had a title,
Yes.
right? And it was a respectable title, correct?
Yeah.
It's something you had to run for and be elected,
Correct.
and you won your election, right?
Yeah.
Correct. You agree that you would, Michelle Maddox,
Yes.
and how do you know her?
I know her through politics.
All right. How long have you known her?
I've known her for several years.
You know her husband as well,
Yes.
and that's Matt Maddox,
Representative Matt.
Representative Matt Maddox. Did you follow Michonne or Matt on Facebook?
I don't, I follow a lot of people on Facebook, so probably, yes.
You probably have followed a lot of people just in Republican politics in Michigan
Correct.
in general.
Yes.
Do you know if at the time that she followed you?
Again, I have a lot of followers on Facebook. It's not a real personal, just my friends' Facebook. I don't know who all follows me.
What is the purpose of your Facebook?
Objection, Your Honor. What is the relevance?
Can you explain the relevance of Facebook plus or the social
I
media?
can move on to the next question.
Thank you.
you would use your social media to report to your followers sort of updates with the election. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes,
You would post about what the Michigan GOP was doing, different events.
yes.
You would report. I'd just like to start back on November 4th, that you recall making a Facebook post that the GOP is currently monitoring numerous irregularities that occurred with the counting and reporting of votes throughout the state of Michigan.
I don't recall the specifics, but I probably did post that, yes.
It sounds like a post that you would have made at the time.
Yes,
And why did you make that post?
because I had some concerns with the election.
Did you want other people to know about those concerns?
Yeah.
Did you want other people in the party to know about those concerns?
Yeah.
On November 6th, you recall holding a press conference with Rama Romney McDaniel.
Yes,
And what was that press conference about?
it was about our concerns about the election in Michigan
Where did you hold that press conference?
at the Oakland County headquarters, Republican Party headquarters. in Oakland County.
Was that something open to the public?
Yes,
Did you invite people to attend?
yes,
Was it also something streamed to the internet?
I don't know that.
Was there news media there?
Yes,
You recall my client was there, John Maddox.
I don't recall. I know his daughter was,
I didn't know her daughter was there.
because she greeted us. And
Do you remember what the general gist of this press conference was? What the news was?
I'm gonna.
Yeah, so the relevance of all these questions, it goes to, there's an element of what was the intent of all of our clients by signing this piece of paper? Did they have the intent to defraud? We can show the court that they were being told by a high-up official that there was election fraud, that there was irregularities. It would go to their intent that they were doing the right thing.
Okay, your last question was about who was at the press conference?
And the last question was what was what did you say at the press
Or
conference?
what did she say at the press conference? That was your question?
Yeah.
And she can answer that question.
we talked, I specifically talked about the issue that I just discussed, which was the concerns with Anson County and the computer system.
What kind
Computer
of,
program.
what were your concerns?
That in Anson County, the votes were cast for Donald Trump, but at first they were shown to be cast for Joe Biden.
How did you know that?
Because it was reported to the party from one of the folks on the ground, I don't know who it was, to my political director, and then the clerk, I believe, came out and discussed that. I don't know the timeline of when the clerk of the county discussed.
And you found this to be credible enough to hold a press conference, correct?
Yes,
Did you ever encourage people to report any voting irregularities throughout the state of Michigan?
yes, I did.
And how did you communicate that?
At that press conference, we had set up a tip line, so to speak, to have folks call in from across the state to report anything that they thought was irregular in the election that they had observed, and then they would talk to a volunteer attorney, and then an affidavit would be taken, and then it would work its way through the legal teams for the different campaigns.
Did you receive tips?
Yeah,
A lot?
yeah.
Can you say how many?
I I apologize, I don't remember, but it was in the hundreds. I would say.
How quickly did those tips come in?
I don't know, I wasn't answering the tip line, I had staff.
Were those hundreds of tips something you received like a day or a week or a month? Okay, that's okay. And just for the record, your personal Twitter handle is Laura Cox MI.
I don't sign in with it, it's just the picture, you just click on.
Did you create the account?
It was a different one and then I changed it. When I left.
Do you have any doubt that that was your handle?
I don't have it in front of me, but I'm gonna trust that you're saying it.
Do you sometimes reshare things that the Michigan GOP posts, that their account posts?
Yes,
And why do you do that?
just to share it to whomever else that maybe follow me and not follow them.
Do you ever have any concerns about attempts to block? Do you have any concerns about the Secretary of State attempting to block the release of any emails or calls?
Can you speak louder, please?
I don't know what you're referring to, sir.
Do you have a concern that the Michigan GOP claiming that the Michigan Secretary of State was stonewalling the party's requests for emails and logs between the Secretary of State and Election Director Jonathan Bader?
I don't recall that.
You don't recall posting that or saying that on Twitter or sharing it?
I don't recall that.
Do you have any attempts at the time? I'm sorry. Do you have a concern at the time, or did you make a statement alleging that Attorney General Dana Nessel was attempting to block the release of audio that revealed that Detroit election workers were being instructed to prevent GOP poll challengers from observing the vote counting process?
I spoke to that issue.
It's something you posted, shared publicly.
I assume I did. I talked about it.
Did you talk about it publicly?
I talked about it publicly
Why did you have that concern?
because I had volunteers. Well, let me back up. First, I saw the reports and news reports and showed the pictures of the walls, the windows being boarded up or cardboard covering the windows at the TCF center. And I had volunteers telling stories about terrible situations that were happening down as they were trying to observe the vote.
Were you at the DCF Center?
Not in it, no,
Why were you not there?
because I was up in management.
At the time, did you believe that, or did you personally believe that there was election fraud?
At the time, what do you mean
On
at the time?
in the date range of November and December of 2020?
I had great concern about the election.
Did you vow to fight to uncover the truth?
I wanted to make sure that we knew that we had a fair and transparent election process in Michigan.
on December 1st, you recall tweeting that applauding the Michigan Senate for investigating the unprecedented amount of irregularities that Michigan experienced in this election.
Sure, I was happy that they were going to look into it, yeah.
And why would you be happy that they would look into it?
We needed to have some, personally, I believe that there can be some improvements, and I believe that one way to do that would be through legislation.
Leading up to the day of December 14th, 2020, did you continue to post on your social media regarding the election?
I don't know. I don't look at my Facebook posts.
Did you post regularly back then?
I don't know what regularly is.
You post once a week or more?
Probably.
Why did you want to have a ceremonial meeting on December 14th?
Because that was the day that the plan that was happening. The plan was already going to happen on the 14th that I believe I'd heard about. So I was just using that day because they already were notified that there was going to be a meeting that day.
Thank you. Nothing.
George Brown on behalf of Marianne. It's accurate to say that around December 14th, Michigan Republicans' primary concern regarding these electors was to make sure that they had a plan set up in case the election in Michigan had been decertified.
Yes,
You know Marianne Henry,
I did.
and you spoke earlier about your concerns about alternate documents. I'm not saying with Marianne, I'm saying today in court. You spoke about some concerns you had about possible documents that were going to be presented to the electors.
Yeah.
You never had any discussions with Marianne Henry about these concerns.
I did not.
And Marianne Henry, to your knowledge, never saw the document that you ended up preparing to the lawyer, correct?
I don't know.
Okay. And you're not aware of Marianne Henry participating in any conversations regarding any documents that would have or would not be signed, or any protocols or anything else that happened or would happen on the board? You're not, I'll ask a different way. Sorry, you're not aware of Marianne Henry participating in any of this planning regarding what was going to be happening on December 14th and what was going to be signed on December 14th, correct?
Correct, I'm not.
Like, no further questions.
Morning, Ms. Cox. My name is George Danini. I represent Kathleen Burton. You know Ms. Burton, right?
I do.
I just want to clear up something because I just wasn't aware of this. You said you were interviewed by the Attorney General's office in August. Is that August of this year? 4 months ago?
Yeah.
August of 2022?
I don't know the date.
But you said.
You gotta speak up.
I don't know the date specifically, but I believe it was August of 2022.
August of 2022. More, I guess 4 months ago or a year and a
It
half
wasn't
ago.
4 months ago.
Okay. And just, I haven't seen anything that talks about that interview, so I'm just curious, do you know if that was audio recorded?
I think it was, I don't know.
All right, Your Honor, the discovery is voluminous in this case, and I'm not sure if it's really in there, but we've received a number of audio, a number of investigative reports. I don't recall seeing Ms. Cox's interview, so if that hasn't been provided, I'd ask that that be provided in the future. Okay, Ms. Cox, you talked about a number of your subordinates, and I think you cut some of the names, but we're gonna go through some of these people, so I want to make sure I know for the Michigan Republican Party, okay? Your subordinates. So, can you tell me who Mike Benarian is?
Mike Benarian was the press secretary for the
Okay.
party.
And what does that mean?
It means he would schedule press hits, he would do some of the social media. He was, below the communication.
Okay, and that was Tony Zammit?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so Mike Benarian reported to Tony Zammit.
Yes,
And we'll get to Tony Zammit a little bit later, but Tony Zammit was present at the Michigan Republican headquarters on December 14, 2020.
yes.
And who's Mike Ambrosini?
He was the executive director for the party.
So does he report directly to you?
Yes, sir.
So he's pretty high up.
Yes, sir.
And how about Troy Hudson?
He was the political director.
And what does the political director do? Just briefly.
They run they do the political side of the campaign. They work with the different campaigns through the election cycle, coordinate with the campaigns and discuss mainly.
And just to kind of orient everybody, then you're at the top,
Yes,
Mike Ambrosini next, and then Troy Hudson's under him.
yes,
All right. And Troy Hudson was present on December 14, 2020 at the Michigan Republican Party headquarters, correct?
yes.
Okay, and then you mentioned actually, before I get to him, how about Stu Foster?
I don't recall if he was there or not, but he was the deputy political director. I wasn't there and I don't remember if he was there or not. I apologize.
That's fine. Stu Foster reported to Troy Hudson, right?
Yes,
Okay. And yeah, I think you're right. He wasn't there on that day, but he was involved in getting some of these electors to show up on December 14, 2020, to your knowledge,
he called to notify them of the ceremony.
at your direction.
Yeah, or I told Troy to tell him.
Fair enough. How about Stu Sandler? You mentioned him. He's the guy that drafted this document that was
He's
just
the-
introduced.
He was my attorney, yeah.
He's your attorney, right?
Well, the general counsel, yes.
No, but you viewed him as your attorney because you picked him and hired him, and he was the person that you sought legal advice from.
Yeah,
In
for
your,
free, you didn't pay him.
in your role as the chair of the
Yes,
Michigan Republican
yes.
Party. Now, we've heard about some other entities, the Republican National Committee. So they're at the national level, right?
Yes,
But the Michigan Republican Party will work with the folks from the RNC, right?
correct,
And they're also located in that building,
yes,
your building.
yes,
Okay. And then we had some mention about the Trump campaign, right?
yes,
And you talked about some folks, and we'll get to them in a moment, but they too had space in your building,
yes,
but neither the RNC folks or the Trump campaign folks were within your chain of command, right?
no,
They did not report to you.
no,
They did not take direction from you.
no,
They were at a higher level, at the national level.
correct.
Okay. All right, let's talk a little bit about the presidential election, or the election. That's November 3rd, 2020, correct?
Yes,
What is your role as the MRP chair leading up to a presidential election?
I just work with volunteers across the state for people to work to get candidates elected from, the local elections up to the presidential election, because that was a presidential cycle. I raise money from donors to spend on candidates across the state. I talk to the press, do a lot of local events to get people excited to work to get their candidates elected.
And focusing on the presidential election, you're aware that the next day, November 4th, the race in Michigan was declared for President Biden, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, but that didn't end your inquiry into these election integrity issues, correct?
Correct.
And you talked about some of them already. You mentioned Antrim County, right?
Yes.
And you talked about issues in Wayne County. I'm assuming that's at the TCF or whatever they're calling it these days.
TCF.
And what do you remember about the issues there?
I just spoke about it, that there was concerns with volunteers not being able to observe. If somebody left, they couldn't get back in, they had to use the restroom, if they needed water. It was pretty contentious.
And when you say volunteer, Republican volunteers, right?
Yeah, I don't know if that was only a one-sided thing, but I only heard about the Republican volunteers.
Sure. And just to kind of get after that a little bit, the idea is both sides can have volunteer representatives to observe the counting process, right?
Correct.
There's a reason why volunteers show up.
Yeah.
And so when they're omitted from that place, it causes somebody like you concern.
Correct.
And those were legitimate concerns that you had at the time.
Yes.
How about absentee ballots? Tell us about that issue.
Well, I had concerns from the very get-go because this was a pandemic. The Secretary of State sent out applications for absentee ballots that were not requested, and state law in Michigan specifies that you have to request an application for an absentee ballot. And she did that, we believe, against the law, but it went out. So applications went out across the state to numerous voters.
So applications to receive ballots. Did you think just absentee ballots went out unsolicited also?
I don't know that part, but I do know that the applications, there was a lot of concerns that people were getting applications for homeowners that had left the, didn't live there and had lived there for 15 years, those kinds of things. We were hearing a lot of stories about that.
Okay, and then in your role as the Michigan Republican Party chair, you wanted to follow up on these concerns.
Correct.
These were real concerns that were being voiced by the constituents in the state of Michigan.
Yes.
And you were gathering that information, correct?
Yes.
And were you getting people to fill out affidavits and provide information to lawyers and things of that nature for lawsuits?
Yeah, after the election, we did that.
Correct. Okay, great. And again, you testified to it already, but you went on a number of, whether it's in the written press or the TV shows, you were out there talking about all of these issues, right?
Yes.
And you mentioned Antrim County. So that was a vote switch situation, right?
Yes.
So just very briefly on that, in Antrim County, I think your testimony was there were votes that should have gone to Trump, but actually went to Biden, right?
Yeah.
And so those votes got flipped.
To my understanding, yes.
Okay. And your concern, and you articulated in the press, was that that same software was used in about half of the counties across the state of Michigan, right?
Yeah.
And so if it could happen in one county, it could happen in the other 47 counties that you mentioned.
Yes.
Where that software was used.
Correct.
And you talked about an incumbent who lost in Oakland County, I believe, but then he was told he actually won. Is that right?
Yes.
Mr. Sonberg talked about Twitter a little bit. I'm not going to get into too much, but I got one here that I saw. You said that Secretary of State Benson serially violated Michigan election law. Do you recall saying that?
Well, I think we were, yeah, I don't recall saying that, but I'm sure we were referring to the impetus of our concern, which was the sending out the applications for absentee ballots across the state.
Okay, so when you said serially violated, you believe that was in reference to the unsolicited mailing of applications for absentee ballots?
Correct.
Understood. Do you believe that now, today, that that was a serial violation of the election law in Michigan?
I do.
And for those listening to your words or reading your words, does that imply that there was significant election fraud in the state of Michigan at that time?
At that time, yes.
Okay. We talked about your role leading up to the election, during the election. Tell us just briefly about your role between Election Day and December 14, 2020. And I want to make sure you and I are talking on the same page. So December 14, 2020, do you recognize that date as the safe harbor date? Do you know what I mean when I say safe harbor date?
I don't.
Okay. So are you aware that that federal law requires electors in all states to vote at a specific date,
I do know that.
at a specific time?
Yeah.
And in the state of Michigan, in the state capital?
Yes.
Okay. And so if I say safe harbor date, December 14, 2020, for this, the year we're talking about, now we're on the same page? Okay. So just tell us, what were you doing, and probably a lot of this what we just covered, but what were you doing in between those time periods, after the election and to that date?
I mean, we just discussed that I had the press conference with Ron McDaniel. We were working with getting volunteer lawyers to take affidavits, collecting that information. I had a Facebook Live event with Rudy Giuliani to update the grassroots activists across the state, to hear from the president's lawyer, an update, as well as Mr. Kern gave an update as well from his Michigan perspective on that event. And then I got COVID, so I was home.
Okay, and you got COVID right before December 14th.
I got COVID. I tested positive on the 6th or 7th of December.
Okay, so you're working from home and kind of coordinating things from
The best I could, yeah.
the best you could. Very good. All right, and you talked about some Trump campaign folks. You mentioned Sean Flynn. He's a lawyer for the Trump campaign, right?
Yeah, he was doing get out the vote.
And I think you mentioned John Black.
He is the RNC.
He's RNC. Okay, sorry. And Chris Velasco is also an RNC person. Remember that name?
Yeah, no, I know who he is. I think he was like a field officer. I don't remember his title. I apologize.
Okay. And then how about a guy named Mark Foster? It's Trump campaign.
I don't.
And you just mentioned doing something with Rudy Giuliani. You referenced him as Trump's lawyer, personal lawyer.
We talked, we spoke as he was President Trump's lawyer. I don't know the real arrangement, but that's the title that we use.
And you talked about how you and your team at the MRP talked to, whether it's Rudy Giuliani, Thor Hearn, Sean Flynn, others at the national level about lawsuits and issues with the election. Is that fair?
Well, I didn't really talk with Rudy Giuliani. He just gave a presentation and then he went to testify at a House oversight committee.
Is that where he said, when you were sitting next to him, that this was, quote, the worst voter fraud in American history?
Might have said that, yeah.
And do you recall sending, you mentioned Ronna McDaniel, do you remember sending a letter, a joint letter with her to the Board of State Canvassers requesting an audit of the Michigan election?
I did.
And you were asking them to hold off on certifying until all these election issues could be resolved.
We just wanted them to take a pause for a couple weeks and look at some of the concerns that we had.
And they voted, was it November 23rd, 2020?
The date escapes me, but
ballpark?
in mid to late November, yeah.
And so your request was, we got real issues here, hold off on certifying the vote.
Yes,
And that's the state board level.
yes, the state. board of canvassers.
Okay, you talked about this a little bit earlier. You said you became aware of a plan related to the Republican electors, right?
Yeah.
All right, and you said you heard, you started maybe getting emails or phone calls as early December, is that right?
At the best of my recollection.
Okay. Do you remember receiving, it was something, a draft resolution, I think it was from the 14th district in the state of Michigan, about direct appointment of Republican electors. Does that ring a bell?
Yes, I do. I remember. I don't remember what it was about. Call getting this resolution.
Who'd you get it from?
I can't remember if it got emailed directly to me by Terry Land, I believe. And it might have came in to my email as well directly, but I don't recall.
And was the idea of that document that the state legislature, the Michigan state legislature would just appoint an elector, the Republican elector instead of the Democratic elector, or do you just not remember?
This was a resolution from the 14th Congressional District Republican Party. And I just received it. That I didn't take any action.
Okay, and ultimately that didn't happen, but it shows you're involved in kind of all the chatter that's going on at the local level, the state level, and the national level, based on your
I'm
role.
sure not all the chatter, but I had a lot of chatter.
Fair enough. Okay. And you arranged the meeting at the Michigan Republican headquarters here in Lansing for the 16 Republican electors that took place on December 14, 2020. Is that right?
I arranged the ceremony.
Well, you arranged the meeting.
I arranged the ceremony.
Fair. Okay. Let's get on the same terminology here. You directed your subordinates.
They're not my subordinates.
Okay. You directed.
They're elected in their congressional districts.
I'm not talking about the elected. I'm talking about your staff. Your
Oh, okay,
people.
I'm sorry.
You directed Troy Hudson and Tony Zammit to contact the Republican electors to show up on December 14, 2020.
To let them know there was a ceremony.
And that their presence was required.
No, it wasn't required. In my terminology, it was never required. I had one signature, and that was Kathy's.
Sure.
I
And when
only
you say-
needed Kathy to show up, and if Kathy didn't show up, then at least I had tried.
Fair enough. So you wanted Ms. Burden there. That's when you say Kathy, that's Kathleen.
I'm
Burden.
sorry, yes.
It's okay.
Ms. Burden, sorry.
So again, the meeting that you wanted to have on December 14, 2020 was really two objectives. Is that fair? One, for Kathleen Burden to sign the document, and that's People's 8. Let's just, where are all the documents? May I approach him?
Yes.
Do I need to ask every time?
You don't.
Okay. So that's the document you wanted Kathleen Burden to sign, right?
Yes.
That's the document that you had your lawyer, Stu Sandler, draft. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then the second part of the meeting was to recognize these electors, right?
There was no two parts to meeting. It was a celebration. I knew that they were trying to meet and that they had some ideas that I felt like I had put the brakes on. I felt like they did deserve to be recognized, albeit it was COVID. It really wasn't a great ceremony, and we had this document that we had negotiated with for her to make sure that we were at least making the Trump campaign comfortable, that we were doing our part, that I was comfortable with, that I knew I talked to Ron McDaniel about, and she was comfortable with.
So, I mean, I don't mean to quibble, but these folks, Kathleen Burden included, came to Lansing, came to the Michigan Republican Party headquarters because your subordinates, Tony Zammit and Troy Hudson, called them and asked them to show up.
Is that a question? Yeah. That's a question, so he's asking you that.
I disagree, but
Okay, so so your testimony is you did not direct Tony Zammit and Troy Hudson to contact the Republican electors to show up on December 14th.
I did ask them to let them know that we were having a ceremony.
So I'm getting confused because I think it was on the direct. She was asked why she chose that date, and it was my understanding in her testimony was that they were already planning to be here.
Yeah, and that's a fair question, Your Honor. So when you say they're already planning to be there, okay, let's just, I'm just going to focus on Kathleen Burden. Okay, I'll let other people deal with the other folks. Was Kathleen Burden going to be at the Michigan Republican Party headquarters on December 14, 2020, without you or your staff asking her to be there?
I heard she was going to be staying the night at the Capitol, and I offered a different option.
Okay.
And
You
I
have-
think that's the fair response,
Okay.
from my opinion.
All right, so let's talk about that. So you said there was some other plan afoot that Kathleen Burden was going to sleep in the Capitol building overnight?
That is what I was told.
Okay, but certainly not told that by Kathleen Burden.
No,
And you have no knowledge that Kathleen Burden ever heard of this story to sleep in the Capitol building.
I have no knowledge.
Okay, so let's assume this happened for a moment, that there was some other plan to sleep in the Capitol building on December 13, 2020. Okay. Do you have any knowledge that Kathleen Burden was at the Capitol building on December 13, 2020 in the evening?
I do not have any knowledge.
Okay. Going to December 14, 2020 at noon. Why was Kathleen Burden present on that day at the Michigan Republican Party headquarters?
Because she was invited by
Fine.
my staff.
At your direction,
Yes,
nobody else's.
not that I'm aware of. She could have had other invitations, but I'm not.
Okay, and you mentioned the ceremonial nature of being, or excuse me, yeah, ceremonial nature of the meeting that you were comfortable with, right?
Yes.
And you said that the Republican National Convention, which happened on August 29th and 30th, 2020, was done virtually. Is that right?
The national convention.
Or excuse me, I'm sorry, Michigan Public State Convention, I'm sorry. State Convention.
Yes.
I'm gonna hand you a document. Oh.
This doesn't have a number on it.
I know,
so
all
it is-
right, that's right.
Okay.
You recognize that document?
I don't recognize it, but it lists electors.
Okay, and being in your role as the Michigan Republican Party Chair, do you have a function and a role in the state convention?
I do.
And are you aware that this is the document that's prepared to identify who the 16 Republican electors were for the 2020 election?
Yes, sir.
And do you see at the top where it says certificate of the Republican presidential electors elected at the Michigan Republican State Convention, August 29 to 30th, 2020?
Yes,
Is this a proposed exhibit?
It will be.
Well, I'm not sure what's happening there.
I'm trying to lay the foundation with the witness as to what this document is, and then I'm trying to.
Then you're
introduce it.
gonna try to admit, in defense, I don't think hasn't admitted any exhibits yet, correct? Okay, thank you.
So I guess we'll call this defense proposed exhibit 1.
Or A.
A, excuse me. Yes. Do you see Miss Burden's name on this document?
yes, sir.
And do you see it? She's the second one there where it says at large.
Yes, sir.
And do you know if Ms. Burden received this document? I notifying her that she was elected as an elector.
I don't know that she received this specific document. She was on the conference call for the state committee meeting when she was elected as the at-large.
And when,
So this document, I don't know who gets this. I apologize.
it's okay, but it's the official document that the Republican State Convention issues to say who the electors were
Yes,
and the ones that were elected, right?
yes.
Your Honor, I move to admit defense exhibit A into evidence.
Any objections to defense A?
The only concern I would have is it does have the electors' addresses on it. I would ask that it be redacted before it's admitted.
Your Honor, as far as my client's concerned, there's going to be some evidence in this case, there already is, that has her address on it. That didn't seem to be a concern then. I'm not going to speak for the other electors, and obviously some of them are not here, but it matches up with some other materials, so I'm not worried about the address for my client.
Yeah, we had exhibits admitted with their address on, is what you're saying?
With Ms. Burden's address on it, yes.
That was admitted today's, on this record?
On this record, yes, Your Honor. I believe it's
Yesterday.
plaintiff's exhibit, or excuse me, prosecution exhibit 7.
Okay, and I have not, 8 was never published to the courts. I haven't seen 8.
8 has no addresses.
No, I'm just noting that I haven't seen it. What, you have an
George Brown
objection?
for Marianne Henry has no problem with her address being
Okay.
public.
Mr. Haggard doesn't either. It's also on the complaint. It's part of the public file. So
Right.
Michelle Lundgren, there's no problem with her address being out there, as Ms. Chartier noted, it's on the complaint, which is a public file document.
Likewise for Michelle Maddox.
Okay.
All right. Defense A is admitted. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Is it marked? It's not marked. We can, we need to mark.
Oh, sorry. about
He,
that.
it does have a thing on, we can just write A on it.
Okay, and then you talked about seeing other documents in the lead up to December 14, 2020, right?
Yeah,
And explain that a little bit. Did you have, you said you got emails and had phone calls in early December 2020? Is that right?
it was early. I don't remember the date, I apologize, but I did have something.
And you did say, though, that the People's Exhibit 7 page 3 was not a document you recalled seeing in the lead up to December 14th, or at least you couldn't be sure.
I think, I'm sorry, it was this front, this, I don't know what page number this is.
that's page 2.
She didn't show me the front, she just showed me this. So I guess this would be page 2. I don't remember this.
Oh, fair. Well, we should probably focus on the right page.
No, I mean, I apologize. You showed me this. You did. I said that I didn't recognize.
Okay, let me clarify the record because the record doesn't know what this and that are.
I
Yeah.
apologize.
So you're saying your testimony right now is that when
I don't remember seeing that page.
when Miss Logan
Yeah.
showed you on direct,
I don't
plaintiff's exhibit 7, she showed you page 2. Right?
That's the first page she showed, and I don't recall seeing that. I believe that was my first.
All right, fair enough. I'm asking you about page 3,
Okay.
entitled Certificate of the Votes. Do you recall seeing that in the lead up to December 14, 2020?
I don't recall if I saw this or something like this.
Okay, but you saw some, and you got that from the Trump campaign folks or the RNC folks, right?
I think it was Trump's campaign, but it could have been both.
Fair enough, and that's fair. So probably Trump campaign people.
I believe it was through Mr. Trump, but
All right. And those conversations, whatever you had leading up to December 14, 2020, with Trump campaign people about other documents, that was limited to you and your lawyer, Stu Sandler, correct?
our conversation
That's right.
with whatever other people had documents and Ron and McMahon.
At RNC, Ron and McGinn.
Yes.
Okay, so again, from the Michigan Republican Party, viewing any other drafts of documents that were being floated around by the Trump campaign, that's limited to you and Stu Sandler.
Yes, I believe so.
You did not have your other subordinate, Troy Hudson, Tony Zammit, those folks weren't involved in these discussions.
I don't believe so. I don't recall, so I don't think so.
Those people, those subordinates that were present on December 14, 2020, only knew about your document, which is People's Exhibit 8, correct?
Correct.
And so if that's all they knew about, that's all they could have communicated to Kathleen Bird.
Correct.
Okay, now, I think we got this, but I want to make sure you directed your subordinates, Tony Zammit, Troy Hudson, to get Ms. Burden present at the Michigan Republican headquarters on December 14, 2020. And you actually had a call with them the day prior, December 13, 2020. Do you remember that?
I mean, I probably talked to them numerous times. Yeah.
Sure, they work for you, they're
Yeah,
your subordinates. But trying to hone you in now, Troy Hudson and Tony Zammit were going to be your two representatives at the Michigan Republican Party headquarters on December 14, 2020, right?
Yeah, I had.
And others.
I think, yeah, yes.
So Henry Toe, we'll get to her in a moment why she was going to be there. But those two, you had a call with them the day prior. Remember that?
Probably did, but I don't recall the call.
Okay, on this topic, basically saying, hey, get
I'm
these.
sure there was some sort of, hey, this is the plan, this is what we're doing. Yes.
And again, okay, never mind. And do you recall what you told them during that call was what were they to tell these people was the purpose of the meeting? Or did you tell them to tell them anything about the meeting, why they were to show up?
I don't recall what I said, but I would assume that it was a ceremony. We were very much discussing ceremony and having, the one signature.
Okay, so, and again, just want to be sure, but if you had a call with Troy Hudson and Tony Zammit and told them, call Kathleen Burden, it's a ceremony and you're going to sign a document, then that's the most they could have told Kathy Burden when they called her to show up on that date. Is that fair?
That's a fair, yeah, I wasn't in the phone call, so.
Sure. They're going to be witnesses, so we'll ask them.
Yeah, that's good.
Now, you obviously see this plaintiff or People's Exhibit 7. Some other document got signed that day. You know that now, right?
Yes,
You did not know that leading up to December 14th, correct?
no, I didn't know it.
And I want to make sure I get this right. You and Stu Sandler were having phone conversations and emails with Trump campaign folks leading up to December 14, 2020, right?
Yes.
And you said you had Stu Sandler draft and prepare Exhibit 8, right?
Yes,
And that was a document that he prepared at your direction.
Yeah.
And you reviewed it,
I did.
and he reviewed it.
Yeah.
And you were comfortable with it.
I was.
And you said that you shared that document. Let's start first with the RNC. You shared it with Ronna McDaniel, right?
Yes.
And what did she say?
She knew that.
I'm gonna object to hearsay.
Well, it's fair, but it's really the effect on her. I want to know what the conversation was so we can get at her, let me just do it this way.
Is it being offered for the truth
No.
of the matter asserted?
Oh, yeah.
Objections overruled.
What did she say to you? Because I want to know what you thought in response.
I think it was some text and she agreed that it was gonna be ceremonial and she had seen stuff.
Did she edit it at all?
I don't believe she did. I wasn't involved in the editing.
That would have been.
Like sharing it with anybody else. I was just working with my attorney.
So again, this is because this stuff gets important. So if you're communicating this document to Ronna McDaniel, it's actually not you doing it, it's Stu Sandler doing it.
I don't recall that I did it. I believe it was probably my.
Okay, but you wanted to be sure that Ronna McDaniel, who's at the national level, was comfortable with the document, right?
Correct.
Okay, and she was.
I think so, because she knew that this was our compromise.
Right. After she got it from Stu Sandler, she didn't call you and say, hey, Laura, this document's crazy.
No, she did not.
Okay. And then you said you shared it with the Trump campaign, right?
Yeah, we were working with Thor Hearn on this.
And you gave a deposition in the January 6th committee, right?
I did.
And you remember, you told them that then too, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's very consistent. Let's explore it a little bit because you didn't really get into it at that deposition. So Thor Hearn, we've heard his name a couple times. Who is Thor Hearn?
He's an attorney. I believe he was a Trump attorney that was, I don't know, I don't think he lives in Michigan, but he was representing one of his clients or one of his assignments for the campaign was Michigan.
Okay, so was he like a regional guy?
I don't know.
Okay, but he had responsibility for Michigan for sure.
He reported, he was the point guy from our perspective, he was the guy we would deal with for legal issues in this.
Okay. And you said you provided him with Exhibit 8, correct?
My document, yes.
Yes.
And there's no exhibit number, so I'm
Oh,
guessing.
we'll write it down on there. And that, now, just again, details. Did you give it to Mr. Hearn or did Stu Sandler give it to
I
Mr.
don't
Hearn?
recall,
Okay, but for sure you gave it to him.
for sure.
And you said you negotiated the document with me.
My attorney worked with Thor on the document.
Okay, on direct, you used the word negotiated the document. So I want to make sure, did Mr. Hearn review and revise the document?
I don't know.
Did he provide red lines to the document?
I don't know.
Did at least at the end of that negotiation, did he say to you or Stu Sandler, I am good with this document on behalf of the Trump campaign?
I can't swear to that. That's what my belief was.
Sure. So going into December 14, 2020, your belief was that your document, People's Exhibit 8, was the document that was going to be signed on December 14, 2020, correct?
Yes,
That you were comfortable with it
yes,
and that the Trump campaign was comfortable with it.
that was my understanding. understand.
And that was the document that Ms. Burden was to sign
Correct.
in front of a notary.
Yes,
And that notary was Henrietta Toe.
correct.
And Henrietta Toe is one of your subordinates who works for the Michigan Republican Party here in Michigan, right?
Correct.
I'm gonna show you. And Your Honor, I guess I never did, but can we publish Defense Exhibit A, which was admitted?
Yes, and he also published 8 at the same time.
Handing the witness what's been marked as Defense Exhibit B for identification. Do you recognize this document?
I do.
Is that your document?
It looks like it, yes.
Is that essentially the executed version of People's Exhibit, you know, what, I'm gonna help you here? People's Exhibit 8.
The 8's on the back.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it looks like it, yes.
And whose signature appears on the bottom of that page?
It says Kathy Burden.
So it's printed Kathleen Burden or Kathy Burden, and then there's a signature over it, which appears to be Ms. Burden's signature.
Yes.
You notice that her signature appears on the same page as the text of this document.
What do you mean text?
So the words that Stu Sandler chose,
Oh,
that
yeah.
you approved of, that the Trump campaign approved of through Mr. Hearn, is on the same page as Kathy Burden's signature.
I see that, yes.
And then there is a page 2 to this document, but the only thing on page 2 is a place for a notary to execute the document, correct?
Correct.
Why did you want this document notarized?
I'm not a lawyer. I don't know, but maybe just to make it look appropriate.
Do notarized documents take on greater legal significance in your mind?
Yes. And
And-
that I didn't weigh in on if it should be notarized or not, to be quite honest.
Was Stu Sandler as a lawyer perhaps the one who said, hey, let's get this important document notarized?
Probably, yes.
And do you see Henrietta Toe's signature on that page?
I do.
Do you see her stamp?
I do.
Do you see the date filled in on that document?
Yes.
When does Henrietta Toe say that this document, Defense Exhibit B, was acknowledged and subscribed and sworn to before her? What date was that done on?
December 14th, 2020.
So based on your review of this document, is it your impression that Kathleen Burden signed this document at the Michigan Republican headquarters building on December 14, 2020 at a little afternoon that day?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd move to admit Defense Exhibit B into evidence.
We have judgment to defense B.
No.
Defense B is admitted. Can someone publish 8 equals 8? I need A and B.
I'd move to admit Defense Exhibit, or excuse me, publish Defense Exhibit B.
You can publish.
And I'm fine with Exhibit 8 being published as well.
You publish that too?
Sure, it's it.
No, you're B
I did it right.
and you're
No,
A.
I don't have any of this in it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, that's fair. Yes, please.
Thank you.
7, B and A.
Sorry about that. Okay, and just again, I want to get into just a couple more specifics. Right before December 14, 2020, we talked to Troy Hudson and Tony Zamet about getting at least Kathleen Burden there, right? We went over that. How did they get the document, People's Exhibit 8, your document.
I'm sure with email.
Okay. And either you emailed it to Troy Hudson or Stu Sandler did, right?
Correct.
Okay, and you talked about how, I want to come back to the sharing your document with the Trump campaign. You said with Mr. Hearn, you shared it, right?
That's who I know. Maybe it was shared with others. I'm not.
How about Sean Flynn?
I believe it was, but I can't swear to it. I don't recall.
And again, your belief is that they didn't have a problem with it, right?
Yes,
And so based on that, your assumption, again, I know you were home at COVID, but your assumption was that was the only document that was going to be signed on that day, right?
yes,
Now, ultimately, somebody, whether it's the Trump campaign as a whole or Sean Flynn as an individual, if the People's Exhibit 7, which is that certificate of votes document, it appears something happened with that document on that day too, right?
it does.
Okay, so if that happened on that day, and you don't have any details, right?
I don't.
The Trump campaign was going against your instructions as to what was to happen on December 14, 2020 in the MRP building, right?
Yes.
And whatever was signed that day, but let's focus on your document, because that's what you said should be signed that day and was signed that day, the Exhibit 8. Only had power, this is what you said, the document only has power if the election is overturned after December 14, 2020, right?
That was my belief.
So Ms. Burden showed up on December 14, 2020, essentially as a contingency, right?
Yes,
Something had to happen after December 14, 2020, but before January 6, 2021, in order for anything she did in that building to have any legal force or effect from your
Your
perspective.
Honor, I'm gonna say that that's a little too broad. That question, anything she did in that building.
That is rather broad.
All right, let's focus on your document. So
I'm sorry. I
Repeat the
got
question.
she was there as a contingency plan.
correct.
She was there to sign a document that if something happened after December 14, 2020, but before January 6, 2021, only then would that have any legal force or effect.
In my opinion, yes.
And informed by Mr. Sandler.
Yeah,
You guys talked about that.
yeah.
Okay, haven't heard a lot about it yet, but I think we're gonna hear about it, so let's just do it with you. Are you aware? Yeah, I'll strike that for a minute. No, let's do it. So, are you aware that there were 2 individuals who were on Defense Exhibit A, the list of the 16 electors? Were you aware that 2 of them didn't show up on that day?
Yes,
And there was some effort to replace them?
I don't know about that.
You didn't know about that?
I only had one signature. I mean, I learned about it from the news reporters and the documents that. So,
One of those was Gerald Wall.
yeah,
Did you know he had COVID?
I did not know that.
And the other was Terry Lynn Land. You mentioned her before.
Yeah.
She was a former Secretary of State.
I didn't know.
She wasn't there on December 14th.
I didn't know she was.
Sorry,
I knew she wasn't coming,
you knew she was not coming.
was not.
How did you know that?
I believe we spoke.
Spoke before December 14, 2020.
I believe we did, yes.
What'd you talk about?
I think just. Are you I think she said, I'm not coming, I just want to let you know or something.
Say why she wasn't coming?
She just didn't think there was any reason for her to be there.
Did you explain to her that Kathy Burden would be signing a document that day? And only Kathy Burden?
I don't know if I got into the specifics. I might have, I don't recall. I apologize.
And again, and I'm just trying to flesh this out a little bit. She's a pretty high up person, right?
But she's a district, she was a chairman of the district.
Chairman of the district, former Secretary of State of the state of Michigan. One of your purposes was, you said it's very prestigious to be an elector, right?
It is,
A lifetime achievement award.
it is.
She probably doesn't care about being recognized like that, right?
I didn't really get into it with her. Part of it was she's to make her own decision. Second, I didn't need her there because I only had one signature. And third, I just don't remember. I was very sick during that time. People don't remember that. I was pretty delirious at certain times.
Okay, and that's fair. And look, you can only do what you best and what you remember. Let me ask you just a very direct question. Did she express any concerns to you about showing up that day?
She might have. I don't remember. I think she did. And she just said, I'm not gonna go. I don't need to be there. You know, blah, blah, blah.
And you didn't put her mind at ease, say, hey, only Kathy Burden's gonna be signing a piece of
I
paper.
don't recall. I don't remember the exchange. It really wasn't that. I didn't care that she went or not. I guess that should be more clear.
Let me ask a direct question because I'm not sure we got to it. Plaintiff's Exhibit 7, for People's Exhibit 7, again,
I
is
don't know.
that's fair.
I think she has 7.
That's fair.
Okay.
Just that page and that page, 3 and 4.
Okay.
When, since you're not sure you saw it before December 14, 2020, when do you believe is the first time you ever saw that document?
I don't know. Whenever it was reported in the news.
After December 14, 2020.
Absolutely. not.
And that's the same for page 3 of the exhibit alone without the signatures.
This might have been in one of the previous drafts. I don't remember.
That's fair. Just want to backtrack a little bit and I'm almost done. You said you had calls with Trump campaign folks, right? Before December 14, 2020.
Yes.
Do you remember a specific call with Sean Flynn, Mike Roman, and John Black on December 12, 2020?
I remember we had a conference call. I don't remember what we spoke about. I'm sure it was talking about my plan versus the original plan.
Okay. Do you remember any discussion about the historical precedent of 1960 Hawaii?
I don't know if it was discussed then, but I heard that discussed before.
Okay, so you have some knowledge of this happening, something similar to this happening in 1960 in the state of Hawaii.
Yes,
And that was explained to you in the lead up to December 14, 2020
yes.
by folks at the Trump campaign,
I don't know who talked about it.
maybe Stu Sam.
A lot of people discussed it. So yeah, I couldn't tell you who.
Okay, that's fair. We had Mr. Brader on the stand yesterday. He couldn't tell us anything about 1960 Hawaii. So I'm going to see if you could tell us a little bit about it.
I just remember that, I mean, from what I was told was that there was a just in case electors defining because Hawaii was in the mix, and so they had two sets of electors. I don't know the specifics of the case. That was one of the things that was discussed, so that's why we had my document, because it was like, if they were called to vote, they would absolutely do what they were supposed to do as electors for the Republican Party in Michigan.
So that was the kind of the historical example that folks were talking about that could be a precedent for 2020.
Correct.
Okay, let me try to flesh it out just a little bit, see if you've heard these things. In 1960, the two presidential candidates were John Kennedy and Richard Nixon.
Object, because it sounds like counsel is testifying. I'd ask that he ask a question to the witness.
I agree.
Your Honor, this is cross-examination. I'm allowed to lead the witness.
Are you asking her a question?
Yeah. Okay,
Okay.
I have to, I'm just laying the foundation.
Okay, you said your statement so far was in 1960, the presidential candidates were. Is that your question?
And I'm gonna say, were you aware of that?
Okay, thank you.
So in 1960, the two candidates for president of the United States were John Kennedy and Richard Nixon. Were you aware of that?
From history, yes, I wasn't born.
You weren't born, that's fair, nor was I. And Kennedy was the Democratic candidate and Nixon was the Republican candidate. Yes?
Yes,
Were you aware that as of the safe harbor date, so in 2020, that was December 14th, but in 1960 is December 19th, 1960. Were you aware that as of that date, Hawaii was called for Nixon?
was I aware? I'm not aware of those specifics.
You're not aware of that?
No.
Okay.
Can we clear? I'm confused. Do you know what the safe harbor is? Because I thought you previously said you're not familiar with that term.
I wasn't.
Okay,
Sorry, the safe harbor.
And I told them that before.
I agree.
Apologies, I won't use that term. The date that the electors are to gather and vote.
Yeah.
That's what our references say, so I'll just say it that way. Were you aware that on the date that is required under federal law for electors to vote in 1960, that Hawaii had been called for Mr. Nixon?
And I believe the witness answered that question that she was not.
Yeah, well, I just want to clarify.
he's just clarifying it now that we are identified or reminded him that she doesn't know what safe harbor, that terminology means.
Do you want the question again, or you got it?
Yeah, I got it. From what I was told, yes, I do know that happened.
Okay, but there were legal challenges at that time, right?
That I was told about, yes.
Yes. And so what happened on December 19, 2020, are you aware that the Republican electors cast their votes and a contingent slate of Democratic electors also voted on that day? Are you aware of that?
I wasn't aware of the dual voting, the specific. I
Okay,
knew that there were two. I didn't know that it was a real specific vote.
okay, so the Democratic contingent electors, as of December 19, 1960, did something to say, we vote for Kennedy on this date contingently, right?
If you say so, I don't know.
No, I want to know if you knew that leading up to.
I knew they did something. That's why I came up with my document.
Fair. So, and I'm asking this because that's important.
Yeah.
Because these things caused you to prepare, or have Stu Sandler prepare People's Exhibit 8, right?
My document.
Your document.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then, just to finish the story, in 1960, something did happen after the electors voted. The vote switched in favor of the Democratic candidate, John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
And so because the Democratic electors created a contingent document on December 19, 1960, that vote was able to count because of what happened after the fact, right?
Right.
And had they not done that, the state of Hawaii's electoral votes would have disappeared.
That's why I did my document.
Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Recess for 10 minutes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you can continue.
Thank you. Ms. Cox, I'll introduce myself again. I'm Paul Stablin. I represent Amy Deschanel. You told us earlier that you had contracted COVID sometime before the December 14th date, right?
Yes,
Okay, so you were quarantining at home, is that right?
correct.
Okay. And the fact that you had COVID, I mean, let me ask you this. If you had not had COVID, you would have been there on December 14th for this ceremonial meeting, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
And what we had heard earlier is that you had directed other people from your staff to contact the electors about this December 4th meeting, right?
yes,
Okay. And one of the other things in regard to directing your staff, having contracted COVID yourself, you were concerned about too many people being in the building and perhaps contracting COVID if there's too many people there, right?
yes,
Okay. And that concern was because you knew others had little kids or had older parents or something like that, right?
yes,
Okay. And the building was actually locked down at the time, wasn't it? Except for essential.
yeah,
People?
I believe so. I can't remember. There were different rules at different times, but.
Okay. But that concern, you told that concern about keeping other people out, let me put it this way. You had told your staff, no one else was allowed to get into the building other than the electors, right?
Yes.
Okay. And any other employees, do you know who it is that was there that day? Yeah, from your staff?
Yes. Tony Zama had just had COVID and he was done with it. That's why he was there. Troy Hudson. I can't remember if he had it or not. Henrietta Toe was there. She was a notary. And Mike Ambrosini was there.
Okay. Mike Ambrosini, that's the same person who had sent you the spreadsheet that had the names and contact information for all of the 16 electors on it, right?
Yes,
Okay. And he had sent that to you in an email. I believe it was on the 12th. Does that sound right?
right around there.
Okay. Also on the 12th, we heard discussion earlier about a telephone conference that you had set up on the 12th.
Or the 13th, I can't remember what day.
Okay, you remember being in a telephone conference with not just you and it was you, it was Mr. Flynn. I'm assuming that's General Flynn or somebody else.
Sean Flynn.
Sean Flynn, okay, the lawyer, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and he's the lawyer from the Trump campaign. Is that how you understand him?
Yes.
Okay. And a Mr. Roman was also on that call?
I don't recall if he was, but he was on the invitation.
Okay, and also then Mike Ambrosini was on the call.
I-
He was on the invitation.
Yeah, then he might have been on.
Okay. All right. And when Mr. Danini was asking you questions, you said that you didn't remember what the purpose of this call was or what the gist of the call was. Is that right?
I don't remember the specifics of the call.
Okay.
I remember the call, but the reason why I remember the call is because it was on my phone.
Right. And they asked you about that during your deposition when the January 6th committee was doing their investigation, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And during that deposition, do you recall that it was on May 3rd, 2022? That sound about right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I'll take your word for it.
All right. And during that deposition, they had asked you, did they not? You already said that. They asked you about this call and they showed you your actual invite.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. And they had that because you turned over your information to them prior to your deposition, is that what happened?
They subpoenaed my information.
Okay.
yes, yeah.
Meaning your information, that would be all of your calendar invites or emails, or both?
And everything.
Okay. What's everything include?
I mean, they took my phone, and my whole phone and all my emails.
Okay. All right. Did they give it back?
Well, they cloned it.
Okay, so they gave you back your phone?
Yes.
Okay. And has anyone from the Attorney General's office asked to see your phone?
They did not ask to see.
Okay. All right. So when asking you about this telephone conference on the,
Can I just, I want to
Yeah.
clarify. Congress didn't clone it, my lawyers cloned it to then search the documents. I just wanted to clarify that.
okay,
But I
And
had
then-
a very lengthy subpoena.
all right. And then they, thank you for that. So then it was your lawyers that turned over what they thought met the,
Requirements.
Request?
Yes. yes.
okay, all right. Do you remember telling the investigator at the deposition that the purpose of this meeting was so that you could facilitate the December 14th ceremony at the, and have it at the headquarters? Right?
Yes.
Okay. And so that they could use the headquarters for this ceremony that you've already talked about?
Yes.
All right. Did you instruct, so you had people that worked for you, one person named Troy Hudson, you mentioned him, right?
Yes.
And one second. Another person that works for you is Troy Hudson, right? Did I just say that?
Yeah.
I meant Tony Zammit.
Yes.
Okay. And you've identified Stuart Foster as your attorney or attorney for
Stu
the
Sandler.
Sandler.
Stu Sandler was the attorney. My attorney.
Okay. All right. Did you ever instruct anyone from your staff to not tell the electors that they were going to be signing an actual certificate of votes? Did you tell anyone from your staff to tell them, or to refrain, to not tell the electors that they were going to be signing a certificate of votes?
I didn't plan to have them sign a certificate.
So you say you never told,
We only had the document that had one signature. That was my document. That was my signature.
did you tell anyone from your staff not to explain why it is that the electors were coming to the headquarters on December 14th?
They were coming for a ceremony.
Okay, did you, all right. So if I understand correctly, you did not instruct anyone in your staff to not tell them why they were going to be there. Did you instruct your staff to tell them they were coming for a ceremony?
Yes.
Okay. We talked about the fact that you had told your staff that no one else was allowed in the building other than the electors, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you aware that they allowed others into the building other than just the electors?
I was aware that they allowed one other person.
And who was that?
Dean Burden, it was Kathy Burden's husband.
Okay. What about lawyers from the Trump staff? I'm sorry, from the Trump campaign.
Well, they worked in that building, if you're referring, I don't know who you're referring to.
Sean Flynn?
Yeah, I mean, he worked in the building, he had keys, he had access, so
Okay.
that, I mean,
They were allowed in the building then, is what you're saying? Regardless of what your order was?
well, My order was just for the electors to come to this ceremony.
Okay. And when the other issue had come up prior to the 14th about a camera crew that having a camera crew in there to record what happened, right?
It didn't come up before it, that I'm aware of. It happened that day, on the 14th.
And you were in contact with people on the phone about what was happening?
Somebody called me, I believe it was Troy, but
Okay.
it could have been somebody else, I don't recall who, and said, somebody has a camera crew, a big camera,
Mhm.
and I said, no. Not coming with the camera.
Okay, and the reason you didn't want a camera crew in there is because you didn't want the proceedings that were gonna happen that day to be misconstrued by anyone after the fact, right?
That was my thought process.
Okay, so you were very specific about the fact that this was simply a ceremonial thing and not going to be an actual certificate of votes, right?
Yeah.
Okay. When I just so we can be clear, the concern you had about being misconstrued was a concern that people might think about this event on the 14th as being an effort to have Donald Trump win the state of Michigan when he had actually been declared the loser, right?
That's not really true.
Okay, that's not what you were concerned about when you said misconstrued?
No.
Have you reviewed your deposition testimony before testifying here
Today?
today?
Yeah, I mean, not today. but yesterday.
Okay. Remember being asked this question and giving this answer on page 59. When the question was, line 5, how did you think it would get misconstrued? Your answer being, I don't know. I'm just trying to troubleshoot so that it didn't get misconstrued. I wasn't there to be able to control the meeting myself. And so I made some strict rules to make sure that we did everything possible to not allow any misconstruement, or however you would say it, of the information. I'm sure that was the wrong word. Next question. Okay, did you think it could get misconstrued as an effort?
Your Honor, I'm gonna check. This sounds like improper impeachment.
No, I'm getting to it, Judge.
You're reading a whole transcript into the record.
No, of course not. But you have to have context. If I just ask this one question, there's no context.
That's not how impeachment's normally done.
All right, a minute ago, you said that's not true. I had asked you whether or not you meant as an effort to have Trump win this. You were worried that it would be misconstrued as an effort to have Trump win the state of Michigan when he had been declared the loser in Michigan. You said that wasn't true.
At that time, I wanted to have a ceremony, but to cover potential legal overturning of the election. If that were to happen, I had my document, which I felt comfortable with through negotiation with folks, to have a ceremony to honor the electors and have one signature that said that they would vote if in fact they were called upon based on an overturning of the election.
Okay,
So
thank
maybe
you for that.
maybe I got a little confused.
Mike,
in what you
right.
said.
Okay, that's probably my
Sorry.
fault.
Sorry.
Okay, let's just make sure. I had asked you a minute ago what you meant by misconstrued was, and tell me if this is true or not. Misconstrued meant to you that it could be seen as an effort to have Trump win the state of Michigan when he had been declared the loser in Michigan. That's what you were concerned about when you say misconstrued.
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, that's all I have. I believe everything else is covered already.
Any questions? Thank you, Les.
No, I'm fine here. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Okay. The advantage of going last is we get to hear the advantage is that if everybody does a good job. I spent a lot of time editing out questions. We've been here a long time, so I'll try to keep my questions mostly to my client. Let's go back to those replacement persons for as electors, okay? Now, you indicated that the procedure was that there's a convention in August in which the electors are then chosen or nominated.
Yeah, they were elected by their congressional district at the state convention.
Okay, okay. And there's then a procedure or a document that's sent out notifying them that they're an elector?
I don't know if there was a document. Most of them, I think, knew, but I can't tell you if there was a document sent to them. I apologize.
Okay, well, would the replacement persons not necessarily have been at that convention?
I don't know.
So you have no knowledge, okay. In fact, wasn't Michelle Lundgren one of the replacement electors?
I don't know.
One of the alternate delegates? You don't know?
I don't know.
Okay. Is there a procedure for instructing the headed electors as to their duties?
I think it's defined in the state law, and there's some things that I think there is something, but I'm not aware.
So you don't know if the electors are instructed as what the duties are, is that correct?
I don't recall. I assume, but I don't recall.
Okay. Did you make a call to Ms. Lundgren a few days before December 14th, asking her to be a fill-in?
Did I, Laura?
Yes,
I don't recall doing that, no.
but you were aware that fill-ins were required, is that correct?
No, I don't. She was elected.
She was elected?
According to the list, she was elected as an elector
Okay.
in her congressional district.
I'll move on. There was no recording of the meeting on December 14th. That's correct.
To my knowledge, no,
And you weren't present at the meeting on the 14th, correct?
I was not.
Okay, and you instructed your subordinates to present your preferred document to the electors, correct?
My documents. Yeah.
To the electors. Okay. But you have no personal knowledge of whether they did that.
They
Do you?
told me they did.
But you don't have any personal knowledge. They told you they did, but you weren't there to see it yourself, were you?
I was not.
Only they could testify as to what they did at that meeting, is that correct?
Yeah.
In fact, anything at all that occurred at that meeting would require someone else's testimony because you have no personal knowledge of what went on. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So you don't know what Michelle Lundgren or any of the other electors were told.
I do not.
Okay. And you don't know if People's Exhibit 7 was an intact document or just a sign-in sheet presented as a sign-in sheet at that date, do you?
I don't know what exhibit 7 is.
Exhibit 7 is
I need to see it.
it would be the, I think, the purported certificate of election.
I'm
It's a
sorry,
3-page.
If you're gonna refer to, I just want to look at it
Sure.
because there's a lot of
I
documents.
don't
think
know if I
my
have
colleague
7.
is going to get it for you.
Oh, wait,
She
no,
had
no,
some,
no,
yeah.
no, sorry. Yeah.
It is document, yes.
Okay. Now, assuming those signatures are valid, were signed, you don't know if that signature page was attached to the remainder of that document. do
I
you?
do not. This is not my document, so I don't know anything.
And
about
you
it.
don't know what might have been said at that meeting to induce those signatures, assuming those signatures are valid. Is
I
that
was
correct?
not there.
Does an elector have to be notified by registered mail?
I don't know.
So you don't know that, is that correct? Yes. Again, let me. You indicated to you that your subordinate said that they carried out your instructions. Is that correct?
That's what they're going to.
They orally told you this, or we have an email that they went to?
I don't think I have an email. I think it was a phone call.
And you had told them what the purpose of this document was, correct?
My document?
Yes.
Exhibit. But not this
Your preferred,
exhibit.
let's call it your preferred document.
No, it was my document. It wasn't preferred. It was my document. Exhibit 8? Yes. We can have Kathy sign it. Kathy Burton.
But the actual language used by any of your subordinates, or whether it was used at all, you're completely unaware by your own personal knowledge, aren't you?
I'm completely unaware.
Do you know what was in Michelle Underwood's mind when and if, assuming that she signed that signature page or that document?
I do not.
Have there ever been any communications between you and Michelle Underwood?
Not that I recall, no.
Okay. Any text messages, anything at all?
Not that I recall.
Thank you.
Direct.
Oh, excuse me, I was submitted a document. I apologize.
I'm sorry, you said you were gonna do what?
One of my fellow councils, I think, has some questions that using, unless of course you would allow them a recross. If I haven't given my recross or my cross, ask me there. Just a couple more questions. Would you agree that nothing you planned for the 12-14 meeting or ceremonial event was ever in any way designed to place Democratic electors with the Republican electors? Is that correct?
I'm sorry, someone coughed, so I missed some of the question myself.
Nothing you planned for, we'll call it a meeting or a ceremonial event on 12-14-20 was ever designed to replace the Democratic electors with the Republican electors. Is that correct?
I would agree with that.
It was always a contingent document. Correct.
Correct.
And although you call it ceremonial, you had it notarized, correct?
I did, yes.
Okay. And it was a document that could have taken on life depending on circumstances in the future. Right.
Yeah.
And you would have communicated that to your subordinates, correct?
I would have communicated what?
That this document that you wanted the person to sign, okay,
One person.
one person to sign could be contingent.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Redirect.
Thank you. Hi again. So your idea for the ceremony was to invite the electors to come up to Lansing on December 14th, 2020?
To my knowledge, there was already going to be a meeting of the electors. I was offering a ceremony at the headquarters as a compromise, for lack of a better term.
And as part of your compromise, were you mandating that the electors appear for your ceremony?
No,
So if electors chose not to appear, that would not have been the issue as far as your ceremony.
it did not bother me at all.
And the electors that you would have asked Mr. Hudson or Mr. Foster or Mr. Zamet to call, those would have been the persons, would those have been the persons that were nominated at the Michigan Republican Convention?
Yeah.
Do I have to ask to approach all the time?
You do not.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna show you, sorry, Defense Exhibit A. I don't think it's stapled. With these, the list of names on Defense Exhibit A, would those be the people you would have had Mr. Zamet, Hudson, and Foster call to appear?
Yeah.
And I want to ask you to look at Exhibit A. Do you see James Renner on there?
I do not,
Do you see Kenneth Thompson on there?
I do not.
And I'm going to show you Defense Exhibit B. And I think it's been fairly fleshed out that you were not present for the execution of that document. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you did not witness whether or not it was Ms. Burden that signed that document, right?
Yes, I did not witness.
Would you recognize Ms. Burden's signature?
No,
So are you able here and now to say that the signature affixed to that document is Ms. Burden's?
I don't know his signature.
Okay, thank you. I believe on cross and you testified that between the actual election day and leading up to December 14, 2020, there were reports of election fraud concerns.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but did you testify that you were getting them from citizens, from lawyers, and even members, active members of the political party?
Yes,
Now, between election day and December 14th, 2020, is it fair to say there were a number of lawsuits?
yes,
Okay, and those lawsuits were regarding concerns for election fraud, is that correct?
Yeah.
Do you know if any of those lawsuits resulted in overturning the results for the Michigan presidential results?
they do not.
Do you know if there was ever a recount requested after the State Board of Canvassers certified the Michigan results?
There was no.
And your language in your document, which is People's Exhibit 8, required a triggering event, correct?
Yes,
And there was no triggering event, correct?
correct.
And to wrap this up, when your plan for the ceremony, was it your intent to have the electors come to Lansing to vote?
No,
As part of your plan, the electors would not have been able to vote unless there was a triggering event, correct?
yes,
Is that why you had the alternative language in your document, which is People's Exhibit 8?
Yeah.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
May this witness be excused?
Yes, please.
I've just got a quick cross based on what was asked.
Something that was not addressed prior?
Correct, there was a question there about litigation. We had not gotten into it. I just had a question about that. About what was just asked by the
Litigation was not addressed prior to?
No, well, not that specific question. The question was asked of the witness about whether or not there was ongoing litigation at the time of December 14th.
That was not my question.
What was your question?
My question was, did any of that litigation result in an overturning of the Michigan results? And that was directly in response to questions that were asked on cross-examination.
I'd like to ask a follow-up on that question.
Well, then I have to let everybody ask follow-up questions again, then I have to let her redirect. So the answer is no.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. May this witness be excused?
Yes, please.
Thank you. There's a sequestration order, so that means you cannot discuss any portions of your testimony with any other witness, okay?
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your Honor.
It is 11:50. So we need to recess for lunch. We'll be back at 1 o'clock.
You said for who the next witness is, please?
What's your next witness?
Ms. Lamb. Ms. Lamb.
May I ask what time we may be ending today? Are we going till 4:35 or?
Well, I'm just trying to stop where it's natural so that I'm not breaking up
Great.
witnesses. We went over 2 hours before I even gave anybody a restroom break. I don't even know if the poor witness needed to use the restroom. So.
I can tell you this before a lawyer needed to.
Yeah, so I'm gonna try to break wherever it's natural. If it's the best for us to stop at 3 versus bringing a new witness to start. Because if we put a new witness on at 3, we'll be here until 6. So we'll see if we can get through one more witness.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Your Honor, you said an hour?
Be back around an hour. I know it's a lot, so we'll probably go back on the record by 1:15.
Sure. Thank you.